One of the reasons I appreciate the Bible so much is that it is real. It tells honest stories of real people who have real struggles. Priests and kings have dysfunctional families. Good people die. Some live with disease and others with disability. And the writers express depression and frustration, despair and anger. Christianity is not selling you something. There are difficult times. One of the places this comes out very clearly is in Psalm 88. Listen to a few verses. For my soul is full of trouble, and my life draws near the grave. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. From my youth I have been afflicted and close to death. I have suffered your terrors and am in despair. You have taken my companions and loved ones from me. The darkness is my closest friend. These are expressions of a person overwhelmed and in despair. Difficult, dark times come from many different places. It's the tearing apart of a lifelong relationship. It's facing death. Dark days are watching your children struggle with no end in sight. And it's the struggle of losing a job and not being able to pay your bills. Now, at the same time, there are promises of safety and shelter in life. Listen to Psalm 91, a few verses from that psalm. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Because He loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue Him. I will protect Him, for He acknowledges my name. He will call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. The promise here is that God will be a shelter to keep you safe. You will not fear the terror of night. No harm will overtake you. But how are we to understand these promises? Let's acknowledge first that God's favor does rest upon dwellers that it speaks of in verse 1. It's those who sustain an intimate fellowship and nearness with God. For them, things often fall into place. Life situations do improve. They do experience God's hand of protection and of His blessing. Psalm 37:23 says, the steps of a good and righteous man are directed by the Lord, and He delights in his way and blesses his path. But let's also recognize that difficult times can happen to God's people. By just reading Psalm 91, you may think difficulties won't happen. So when bad things happen, you react by pulling away from God. You think the promise didn't work. And maybe that's happened to you. But by comparing these two Psalms, 88 on one hand and 91 on the other, we see both sides. And that brings us to our key spiritual insight. Real life does have difficult times. But God is a shelter for those who trust in Him. So, what does it mean when it says that God keeps you safe? It offers the promise of God's protection amid hardship and problems. God will show you how to go on, even in the midst of all the chaos. Not from all trouble, not in all trouble, but through all trouble. It's particularly a spiritual safety, reaching into the depths of our soul. Joseph was a young man who was hated by his older brothers. He was the favorite of his father, and he had dreams of his family bowing down to him. Because of their hatred, they sold Joseph into slavery in Egypt. There, his master's wife propositioned him to go to bed with her. And she was humiliated when he ran and accused him of seducing her. For this, he was thrown in prison for many years. Because God gave Joseph the ability to interpret dreams, he was able to warn Pharaoh of a coming 7-year famine. And for this, he was made one of the highest rulers in the land. One day, through a chain of events, his brothers came for food, and they bowed before him, unaware that it was Joseph. When he got around to revealing his identity, they were frightened. At a later time, after their father had died, Joseph said to them, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive." Joseph was saying that in the midst of all these horrible difficulties, God was keeping him safe, and he was keeping the brothers safe as well. Now, also, take a moment to consider Romans 8:28. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. Is there any promise in the Bible that gives more hope, more happiness, more freedom, more joy, or more confidence? God takes everything that happens in your life, if you're his, and weaves it together to produce something that is truly good. Not superficially good, but really good. It may not seem that way now. It may not seem that way when it's happening, but that's what God is doing. Romans 8:31 says, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" No matter how tough life gets, economically, maritally, socially, nothing can successfully defeat us, since God is for us.